All right. Okay, this is the second video, second episode of cases for GOER, um, or GOER. Now we're going to talk about, again, clinical cases on a set time, so I don't want to go over, I want to make them around 8 minutes, less than 10 minutes. So, okay, this is a stats question, okay? A professor is doing a study somewhere, right? It's looking at the relationship between tuberculosis and SSRIs, right? So the professor is looking at people who have tuberculosis and people who don't have tuberculosis. And it's going to their files to see if they used SSRIs before or if they didn't use SSRI before, right? What kind of study is this? Is it a case control? Is it a cohort study? If it's a cohort study, is it a prospective cohort study or is it a retrospective cohort study? Is it a cross-sectional study or is it, yeah, that's it, yeah, the three, right? So this is a case control study. Why is it case control? Because when the professor is starting to look at them, the very first thing he's looking for is, do they have the end result or do they not have the end result? Meaning, do they have TB or do they not have the TB? The ones that have the TB is going to be our case. The ones that don't have the TB is going to be our control, right? And then the factor he's looking for is SSRI use, right? Now, well, how would this study look like if it was like a cohort study? Cohort study would be like, we go find people who take SSRIs and people who don't take SSRIs, and we look for the final result. We look for TB, right? Now, if they have developed TB in the past, right? That's retrospective, and if we like start from now and then look in 5 years, that's prospective, right? How would a cross-sectional look like? Cross-sectional is that if we do a survey of a population, let's say we do a survey of Grenada, we're like, how many people who are taking SSRIs have TB, and how many aren't taking SSRIs, don't have TB? You just like find out all that quadrant of basically have TB, not have TB, takes SSRI, not takes SSRI. We just figure out how many people have that, but we're doing it at a like time at a set point in time. Right? That's a cross section. We're taking a cross section of the population, how the population is doing in one set time. Right? Okay. Right. Don't do don't take stat lightly. I feel like a lot of people are like, oh, I'm good at stats easy, whatever. I think the reason you feel like you're good at stats is because the stats questions you've encountered so far are easy, but stats can be really tricky, especially for people who just memorize equations. So understand sensitivity, specificity well, right? Understand likelihood ratios well, and predictive values is kind of like sensitivity, specificity, right? For sensitivity, the way I think about it is how trigger happy a test is, right? So if just like if a person is really sensitive, they get triggered a lot, right? So if a test is really sensitive, they get triggered really easily, right? So if I get triggered really easily, then when I get triggered, you can't really trust it. So that's why we don't use high sensitivity tests for ruling something in. We use them for ruling out, right? But understand what positive and negative likelihood ratios are, right? When you're thinking of whether a test can diagnose or can rule out a diagnosis, you're actually not looking at sensitivity or specificity. You're looking at positive likelihood ratio and negative likelihood ratio. I'm going to define positive likelihood ratio and negative likelihood uh, ratio is going to be the opposite of that. Positive likelihood ratio is the ratio of someone with the disease testing positive compared to the ratio of someone without the disease testing positive, right? Now, if a test has a very, very high, let's say 10 positive likelihood ratio, that means if you have the disease, you're 10 times likelier to test positive compared to someone who doesn't have the disease. Let's say if this ratio is 3 or 2, if I got tested positive, let's say, and I actually have the disease, if my likelihood is only twice as high as someone who doesn't have the disease to test positive, then that's not a really good diagnostic test, right? That's not a really good test that we can like rule things in with it, right? So understand that and not like read the first aid part for that. It should be said for like the easy to medium questions. For hard questions, you really need to have a deep understanding of what these things mean. I don't even know if there's going to be hard questions on this exam, right? Now let's talk about, uh, well, let's talk about this case. You got a young kid, has some sort of malabsorption. The question says, oh, like fatty poops, whatever, loose poop, whatever. And then the tissue transglutamase antibodies on, so what does that signify? That signifies celiac, right? And then the other thing is, how do we know what it is? Like, how do we get the final? If we want to get a biopsy, where would we get a biopsy from? You get a biopsy from the duodenum. That's the place you can reach anyways. You can't like reach further down with an endoscopy, right? What do we see in biopsy? So in biopsy, the intestinal has some villi, right? But that's not all it has. Once in a while, it also has these pits that they produces the cells, right? So basically villi and pit, villi and pit. Okay, right? What does celiac do? Celiac makes these deeper, makes these shallower, right? So you kind of lose you lose your villi, so you have like very deep pits, something like this, right? And also you have a lot of blue cells. These are your T cells, right? These are your T cells that get activated, right? And there's a lot of damage. Why do you get malabsorption? Because you need all these surfaces to absorb things properly. They all get destroyed. Also, you're stimulating your T cells. You might get a T cell lymphoma, right? This is really important. T cell lymphoma is the type of malignancy that predisposes you. And also, there's like some conditions that celiac in general puts you at a risk of. What are those conditions, right? Sometimes they're not going to tell you what it is. Sometimes they're going to give you like very general description of malabsorption, but they're going to give you some of these associated conditions, and you're going to have to guess, right? They're not going to give you whatever tissue transaminase, transglutamase is positive. They're going to be like, oh, a guy has some rashes on his extensor surfaces that are really itchy, and they're going to be like, what else is this guy or like has a risk of catching or had a risk of developing in the future? And there's going to be all sorts of things. One of them is going to be cooling into malabsorption, right? So the description of the rash on the extensor surfaces, meaning like these surfaces. So these are the flexor surfaces. These are the extensor surfaces, right? And it's really itchy. Is I've seen this in many MCQ questions, but like for some reason not a lot of people know about it, or they don't know what it is or what it means. This is herpetiformis dermatitis, right? Herpetiformis dermatitis. It is associated with, so if you have your like basement membrane here, you have your epidermis here, right? And then you have your basal lamina or like lamina propria here, right? So in this disease, a bunch of IgA antibodies get accumulated here, and there is also some T cells, some let's draw on what I don't know here, some T cells that kind of surround them, right? Actually, no, not no T cells. You just have IgA, right? And it's really itchy, right? So take this IgA and also try to remember that, and the reason it's called herpetiformis because it looks like herpes. We have IgA, right? Compared, and then try to remember IgA vasculitis and IgA nephropathy, right? Those two are associated with this. IgA vasculitis, kind of shows they both like are more likely to show in a young kid. It happens after infection. The vasculitis has like skin rashes that are usually in the legs in kids. The nephropathy is IgA nephropathy, like last module stuff. All right. And how does this is important distinction or important thing that it can clue you into celiac. The problem with celiac is that they don't tell you much. Like it's kind of like, oh shit, the person has like malabsorption, but they don't tell you anything else. You're like, okay, then it must be celiac, right? But in kids, the way it presents is with like failure to thrive. So the kid is like, oh, 20th percentile for like height and like 10th percentile for weight, right? That kind of clues you into celiac. For an adult, it's just kind of like general malabsorption stuff, okay? So when you see like a malabsorption, you're like, shit, I don't really know what's going on. Then it's probably celiac, okay? All right, I'm gonna end this video. Maybe I make another video.